Beef Wellington. Done.
This is how Gordon Ramsay made beef Wellington at home, and this is how it looks like at his restaurant, Bread Street Kitchen. I studied 5 of his different recipes, and I thought I was well prepared, but there were many unforeseen challenges. The reason for attempting to make this is because at Bread Street Kitchen, it cost a whopping $168, and Natasha wants to try it. So I decided to use that money instead to buy a whole beef tenderloin to try making it at home. It's a big piece of meat from Cold Storage Takashimaya, and for the beef Wellington, the cut we want is right here in the middle. But this cut weighs like 1 kg and we only need like 500 grams. So I cut it into half so I could make 2 beef Wellingtons. It has this nice marbling and becomes rounder when it gets wrapped or squished up. I'm making full use of this by cutting out the extra fat to make a sauce, cut the thicker parts to make stick, and slice the loose ends to dehydrate for jerky. Season our center cuts with salt and pepper and rest in the fridge. I'm going to follow his restaurant recipe, but I'm also going to try to make puff pastry for the first time. I see many people warn about not making puff pastry at home because it's time consuming, so I wanted to see what's all the fuss about. Most popular puff pastry recipes I see use about 45% hydration and 80% butter, so we'll use the same for our test of full puff versus rough puff versus store-bought, which is a decent one containing butter and not palm oil. The key difference I find between the full puff and the rough puff is the extra prep work for the full puff at the start to flatten the dough into a square, and also the butter. For both methods, you also have to keep the butter cold, but once out of the fridge, you can't roll it immediately, so sometimes I wait a while or warm it up with my hands. Meanwhile, for the rough puff, I could take my time to make a doughy ball with cold butter chunks in there, which I should have cut smaller. That's a hole from rolling the cold butter too hard. So the challenge I notice is that the window for doing this rolling and folding is very small. To roll evenly, make multiple dents and then roll out the bumps. Then when rollable, I have to work really quickly and precisely because after 2 sets of folds or just 5 minutes, the dough starts to get too soft or shrinks as I roll, so it needs to go back into the fridge. As suggested by pastry experts, we need about 6 sets of folds. But overall, it's not too bad because while it firms up in the fridge, I could go and do something else. The end result appears to be smoother for a full puff, while the rough puff still has some visible chunks of butter in there. To taste test, I baked a small piece of each puff pastry and immediately noticed that the rough puff and the full puff are a lot puffier compared to store-bought. One reason could be because store-bought is way thinner, rolled out by the machine, whereas I tried to roll mine out as hard as I could get it thin. Store-bought is crispy and flaky, but homemade puff pastry are extra crispy and has chewy layers in between. The full puff does puff up just a little more and feels more crispy and airy, but taste-wise is about the same as rough puff. I think the goal here is to have the right amount of puffiness as Gordon Ramsay's. His beef Wellington puff pastry looks thin and puffs up maybe 2 to 3 layers. At this point, I'm not sure whether I should use my homemade puff pastry for beef Wellington because won't it puff up crazily? We'll try anyway and see what happens. Set these aside for a snack and rest the puff pastry in the fridge while we conquer our next ingredient. The mushroom filling. It starts by making a chicken stock first, by deboning a whole chicken for the breast later and debone the leg bones too to simmer the skin and the bones for 3 hours to get this liquid gold. The remaining chicken skin makes a nice lunch by the way. Then chop up our mushrooms, and since I misread the recipe when I only got 200 grams from a box of mushrooms, so I topped it up with some seafood mushrooms. Overall, I think chopping could be automated by the blender on low speed to save time and effort, except for the small amount of shallots, garlic and thyme leaves which we need to sweat down in a separate pan. The next part is interesting because Gordon said this.
We don't put oil or butter into the pan, we put nothing in there.
But his restaurant recipe told you to add some oil and potentially even more until the mushrooms caramelize. So I add oil to fry the mushrooms, and after most of the water has evaporated or the steam has reduced, I added a little more oil to ensure that it doesn't stick, and lower the heat also as the pan starts smoking to sizzle until the mushroom smells like toast. It does taste a little like toast too, so I think we're good. Then we add in our sweated down garlic and shallots and deglaze with our chicken stock which I made earlier. Since I don't drink alcohol, I deglaze the pan with more chicken stock. The recipe isn't clear how much liquid to cook out because you could still pour the mushroom mixture at the next step. So I cooked it until almost dry, I suppose, and it does look like the jet black mushroom filling of Gordon Ramsay's beef Wellington. Then chill the mushrooms and chop up some English parsley and pulse our chicken breast from earlier with a little double cream to get this chicken mousse. Nice pillowy texture like mashed potatoes, but it's not edible yet. Mix everything together, Duxelle done, back into the fridge. I will use a blender next time to get this done quicker. Next condiment to prepare is the English mustard. I think Gordon used Coleman's English mustard, and I guess it also comes from these yellow mustard seeds, which cost 2 times more than black mustard seeds. I worked out the amount of sugar and salt to add from Coleman, but after blending the yellow mustard seeds, it isn't as spicy, though the saltiness and sweetness are there. So I changed to black mustard seeds, which are spicier, and added turmeric powder for color. But it still doesn't look exactly like Coleman due to these many black specks. But taste-wise, it's about 80% there. Good thing though is that this homemade mustard doesn't contain thickeners like wheat or gum. The next challenge I had was with the crepes. Gordon doesn't serve Parma ham at his restaurant unlike his video, and I think it's because it's cheaper and in my opinion also quite a waste for the delicate ham flavors to be mixed with the flavorful beef. Mix the crepe ingredients as per the recipe, and my first batter was too thick, perhaps due to my thick soy milk. Plus, I should have lifted the pan while pouring the batter, so these crepes were crappy and flopped. So I made a second batter with more water this time, and it worked better. But flipping is still a challenge. It's thin and it's flexible, and I had to try to flip it out onto a plate and then back onto the pan. After multiple attempts, I got 2 imperfect crepes with a small crack and hole here and there, but it should be alright once we overlap both of them. Finally, we sear our beef tenderloin. Hot pan, olive oil, sear. About 1 minute on each side. I think I didn't cut the meat evenly straight down, that's why it looks a little deformed, but that's alright. Brush our beautiful beef with homemade mustard and rest in the fridge to hang out with its friends. Then the rolling part. This box of cling film takes some practice to get it nice and flat. Don't let the cling film touch itself or it would stick. I find it easier to wipe the surface first with a damp towel and then press the cling film on it to stick down, then fold the ends. Make 2 overlapping layers for a wider surface. Put in our overlapping crepes. Then with the mushroom filling, roll it out lightly with a rolling pin because it's very soft and breaks easily unlike puff pastry. Then flip it on to our crepe. With a little handicraft, I managed to make the layer even. It's key to do so as many beef Wellingtons I've seen could have a more even mushroom filling. Season the mushroom and then on with our beautiful beef. And carefully lift up the cling film to roll the crepe around it. The first time I did it, trapped some air around the roll, which is not good because the roll will not be tight. So I poked a hole to let the air out and wrapped another layer onto it. Looks better now. Let the squishy roll set in the fridge. Then roll out my full puff pastry. On with our squishy roll. Then let the cling film do the work. Actually, I'm doing the work. I should have made the pastry a little wider, but luckily it was just nice. This time, I did massage some air out of the pastry before tightening the cling film so no air gets trapped. Twist it nice and tight. Pinch the ends to cover any holes so it looks like a big squishy yellow bolster now. Because I took a whole day to prepare this, it's a little too late to bake this now and we haven't had dinner yet, so I put the completed roll into the fridge and used the seared pan earlier to deglaze with more chicken stock and stir-fry veggies with a little homemade mustard for a nice quick dinner. The next day, I wanted to get this nice crisscross pattern like Gordon Ramsay restaurant. I didn't want to buy a lattice roller tool just for puff pastry, so I made manual alternate slits on my puff pastry and hope it works out after a rest in the fridge. Out with our giant roll. Brush with egg wash and also on our improvised lattice puff pastry. It has to be very fresh out of the cold fridge to be firm enough to lift onto the roll. Slowly slide it into place. Cut off the excess and tuck it underneath. Yeah, it looks pretty good like I had a lattice roller. Season the puff pastry once more and onto a preheated baking tray to bake at 210 degrees Celsius for 20 minutes. While baking, we can make our sauce by frying the trimmings, rendering out the fat, and adding our remaining chicken stock and a bit of mustard for flavor. and since I didn't have enough chicken stock, I added flour to thicken. After 20 minutes, the puff is baked beautifully brown, but we have a problem. When I checked the meat temperature inside, it's still cold, like 13 degrees Celsius only, meaning it's raw, and I think because it was chilled overnight until 4 degrees. So I put it back into the oven and lowered the temperature so as not to burn the puff pastry. After baking for 1 hour, we achieved a borderline medium doneness, which is what we want at around 60 degrees. I thought it was a failure due to the juices leaking, but it smells really good to me. That's the hole from the thermometer probe. So lesson learned here is, you could prepare beef Wellington well in advance in the fridge, but you need to bake it for about an hour until done. Similar to how long you need to wait when you order it at Gordon's restaurant. I believe they only sear their tenderloin on order, assemble the Wellington and then bake it for about 20 minutes. Bread knife in. Oh, the puff pastry is really crispy. First one, oh, puffy crust with crepe. Second one, oh wow, beautiful medium doneness. More juices coming out. I'll let Natasha have the first bite.
The meat is so juicy and I can bite right through it, and the pastry was so crispy. I love it so much. It's very yummy and everything just match out very nicely together.
She said it tastes like coming from a restaurant, and I'm glad we made it. However, I admit that the sauce was a letdown as it was bland and too starchy, so I need to learn how to make a better sauce. After taking a bite, I finally understood the magic of this dish. The puff pastry on top is crispy and buttery and complements the beefiness for a rich, meaty flavor. The mushroom stuffing also drives the flavor of herbs and chicken, and every layer of ingredient comes together as this beautiful, savory, juicy meat puff. Wow! Anyway, I'm curious why the puff pastry didn't puff up as much when it was flat. Maybe because it was rolled. Let me know in the comments if you know why. The bottom layers also kind of melded together while the top puff puffed up just a little bit until crispy. The mushroom filling also did turn out nice and even. Oh yeah, the fresh puff pastry, it's so crispy, it's worth it. The next time though, I will drop the chicken breast to make it lighter and make better crepes of course. Each slice is actually quite filling, so I had to keep the other half for another day. Overall, I thank Gordon for publishing his restaurant recipe online, and I'm happy to make for Natasha my first and best yet beef Wellington at home.